Good evening, everyone. Welcome to this year's Gilkey Lecture Series speaker. My name is Suzanne Tillman. I'm the Dean of the College of Business. The Gilkey Lecture Speaking Series was endowed by Harold and Priscilla Gilkey to bring top leaders in business to interact with our community at the College of Business. And boy, has Ryan been an exemplary Gilkey lecturer. He has taught in 4 classes already. He has met with faculty and staff, and he is sharing his insights tonight with the community. What Harold and Priscilla hoped when they started this series was that we could bring people to our college who would inspire, who would give insight from their real-world experiences, and most importantly, show the students paths that are available to them. And Ryan Hansen has done just that. So tonight we are honored to welcome Ryan Hansen. He's a seasoned entrepreneur, the founder and former CEO of Pathlabs. Under his leadership, the company, originally founded as LumenAd in 2014, expanded to serve marketing agencies across the country, and it was acquired in 2024. Not often mentioned, as it is always been ranked super highly for a great place to work. Anybody who knows entrepreneurship knows the founder effect and what kind of impact that has on the culture in an organization. And so he has been incredibly generous with his time. In addition to Ryan speaking tonight, we have help from Justin Engel, who's going to moderate questions towards the end of the talk. If you haven't already listened to Justin on a New Angle podcast, it is broadcast through Montana Public Radio and Yellowstone Public Radio on Thursdays and on Sundays. He also has a book that is currently sold out on Amazon. This is Wildfire, and I encourage you to check that out. And since you can't maybe buy it unless you go local, you might also want to listen to the podcast that won a National Edward R. Murrow Award called Fireline. I am just delighted that Ryan is willing to spend time with us, share his insights. We will have a reception afterwards. We encourage you to stay, and we can continue that conversation if you don't have a chance to ask the question that you wanted to. So please help me welcome Ryan Hansen.
Dean Tillman, thank you so much. Faculty and staff, thank you so much for letting me come to your classes, talk to students, and all of the work that went into putting this event on. It's not missed on me how much of an honor it is to be a part of this lecture series, and to even be mentioned in the same conversation as some of the people that have come before me is meaningful to me, to say the least. So really, I appreciate that. Before, I've got some slides. I'm going to go through some slides. There will probably be plenty of time for questions, and Justin can help facilitate. But before I jump into those, I just want to say that I'm up here because I founded a company that eventually became Pathlabs, and it was acquired in the summer. And so that got a lot of attention, and so it's like, what they did was really impressive. Let's hear about what they have to say. It must be really cool. But so yes, I'm here telling this story, and a lot of it's rooted around Pathlabs. But Pathlabs, the story of Pathlabs is a story about a lot of people, not just me. I'm important by default because I was there in the beginning, but there were a lot of people along the way. So I'm fortunate to tell that story. But a lot of people were involved: employees, early customers, champions, the business school. The business school, to say the least. The UM was our second customer when we first started out. And even there at the end, when we were in like final negotiations to be acquired, and we needed a space, the business school lent us their executive boardroom, where for a couple of days it was a war room with the Pathlabs folks and the MIQ folks and whatever. And so everything begins and ends at the University of Montana, I suppose. So, anyways, it's great to be here. Jump into some slides, maybe. Oh, yeah, great. All right. All right. So just to jump right into it. Wrong direction. In 2014, I launched a company with $10,000. In 10 years later, that company was acquired for 9 figures. So this is a quiz. But first, before the quiz, let's put this into context. 90% of all startups fail. Of those that succeed, a very small percentage of those achieve an exit greater than $50 million. So by that math, 0.15% of all startups reach that milestone that Pathlabs achieved, right? So that's a pretty unusual, exceptional outcome. So given that, am I A, a genius, B, a visionary, am I lucky, or am I just someone who worked hard, took smart risks, and failed forward? So by process of elimination, we'll go to the top. Am I a genius? My mom thinks so. She's right here. But despite the facts, no, I'm not a genius. I got a 2.9 GPA in high school, barely that much better in high school. I took the LSATs twice after college, and I never got into law school. I am not a genius. Am I a visionary? No. I was not born with a business plan in hand. I do not possess some exceptional startup skill set or some sort of technical ability that makes me really great at starting, growing, scaling a business. Like, none of those things. Am I lucky? No, I'm not lucky. I'm very fortunate. But there's a difference, and it's subtle. There's always like certain pieces of luck in everything, but no, we took advantage of a lot of opportunities that were in front of us, and we capitalized on those, right? But we had a lot of fortune there, but we were not lucky. Okay, so by process of elimination, I'm just someone who worked hard, took smart risks, and failed forward. And so that's usually like so I've been getting asked a lot. When Pathlabs was acquired last summer and that news came out, I get asked by a bunch of people, like, what was your secret sauce? Like, you guys are obviously really smart. This was like preordained to be successful because you had some unbelievable insight, or you like willed some vision into existence. And like time and time again, when I like have to tell this story, whoever I'm telling it to ends up just super underwhelmed because it's so boring. But the reality is, even though like people don't say that, because that's not an entertaining story. That's not typically a story worth telling. But like the reality is that exceptional results come from mastering the fundamentals, not exceptional people. And I really believe that. There's some Pathlabs faces here right now. They will tell you that we had nothing figured out. We were not exceptional at this at all, and we made every possible mistake in the book. And it wasn't but through like brute force and the application of some fundamentals that I'll walk you through here today that ended up in like this like obviously very fortunate outcome. But I take issue with the way that success oftentimes gets glorified, because that makes for like a great story to tell. Like oftentimes when people talk about these exceptional outcomes, they apply these like archetypical like startup founder stories to them, and they put them in these buckets. And at best, it's not accurate. It's not representative of what's actually happening. But at worst, we're misleading an entire generation of entrepreneurs that think that they might not have what it takes to actually achieve something similar. And that's, I think, a really big problem. And so if given a microphone, that's what I want to talk about. I knew exactly what I wanted to talk about, like as soon as they asked me to do it. And so, but again, that's not like that great of a story. It's kind of boring. Like the fundamentals are boring. There's not that much to it. But it's what I think it's like the strong point of view that I have is that. Like I'm not exceptional. I'm not a genius. And I think that's awesome. So now we'll go backwards and I'll kind of like tell this story through the lens of starting LumenAd and then Pathlabs. So about me, I founded LumenAd in 2014. LumenAd lived in the world of advertising and marketing. What was my degree in? Accounting. Not at all in marketing. Okay, well, how much marketing experience did I have? 0 years of marketing experience. I had 0 years of marketing experience. But I had a job in 2014, and I was like endlessly curious about, I come from a family of entrepreneurs and small business owners, and I knew that I wanted to do the same thing, and so I was just looking for a thing that made sense to me. And so, I'll spare you the details on how I was like exposed to this key insight, but like I realized that there was a really big difference in what was possible in the world of technology-first advertising versus what most marketers still had access to. Marketers in 2014 were spending a lot of money on marketing and advertising, and they were running ad campaigns the way that they had always been for decades. But I realized that there was this whole new world of technology-first advertising that could help them better allocate their investment into like more hyper-targeted ways to reach their audience. But they had no way of using it. The software was cool, the capabilities were cool, but there was absolutely no way that they could even get a login, much less learn how to use it. And so that was just, I literally knew nothing other than the fact that disparity existed. And if we could figure out how to solve that problem, there might be a business there. So I sold my FJ Cruiser and put the money into a checking account. I put $10,000 into a checking account, and instead I bought a repossessed Toyota Camry for $500. And I spent $100 on LumenAd.com, the domain, and I paid a local designer some dollars to create us a logo. And from that, we just slapped together a pitch deck and started trying to sell it. I think it sounds like I'm simplifying this for dramatic effect. I can't overstate enough how like little else we thought about and how little else we knew about what we were doing other than like we just put a pitch deck together and started talking to marketers. And eventually one of them said, yes, that sounds great. We would love to buy that. And we had no idea how to actually do the work. No idea. But we figured it out. But again, though, like, that's okay. Like, we didn't have a perfect plan. We made lots of mistakes. But there was one fundamental thing that just made sense to me at the time, which was, if we're going to take a risk on something, let's make it be a calculated risk. Let's be smart about it. And to me, one thing that makes a bunch of sense is that if you're going to start a business is fundamentally an exchange of value, right? Like, I have a problem, I'm going to pay you to solve it. And so, like, what problem is there in the world to solve? Because, like, in order for somebody to pay me money, I need to solve a problem for them. And so start first with a problem. That just made sense to me. There's plenty of businesses that have been successful without starting with a problem to solve. But to me, it just makes way more sense to start there first. Starting a business is risky. It's super risky. But risk is a spectrum, and you can de-risk things. I'm saying the word risk a lot, and it's. But you can. There's a difference between risk and calculated risk and gambles and whatever. Like, take calculated risks, and there's ways to de-risk it. Make lots of little tiny bets. Run lots of little experiments. Like, optimize for two-way door decisions, not one-way door decisions. Like, all of those things. Like, all of that stuff can help you de-risk this. Again. That's not that great of an anecdote, but that's for us like one thing that was always made sense to us. Okay, so we eventually figured out how to do this work, and we again, we got some early traction. We found some customers. Again, like the University of Montana was our second customer, which is so rad. I'll never forget it. But we had this, like, we were very clear on this, like, this value prop, this messaging. You know, a lot of dollars get invested into marketing. It's very unclear as to whether or not any of that works. There's a different way to do this. The technology is complicated. You don't have to know any of it. You just have an audience. You have a message. That audience is online. We'll find them. We'll put messages in front of them. We'll figure out which ones are working, which ones aren't. We'll spend less on the ones that aren't and more on the ones that are. Like, that was it. So yes, we were fortunate to get some traction early on. But that's because, like, we were pretty clear on, again, we had validated some things and we had validated some problems. And that was rad. Like, we started growing. Eventually we optimized. We found this key insight, which was that actually, instead of just going and selling these services to end advertisers like the University of Montana or Community Medical Center or First Security Bank, we could actually just find one new customer, a marketing agency, and then they had a bunch of customers. And so we optimized into marketing agencies, and we started growing pretty quick. At least we thought. What actually happened is we got pretty lucky with a couple of initial customers and with those marketing agencies, and our business with them grew really fast, and so we grew really fast, which was fun. And from the outside looking in, you know, by year 3, I think we surpassed $5 million in revenue, and we're like, huh, we're awesome at this. This is great. But if you only have a couple of customers, that's called customer concentration risk. And if one of them goes away, the party goes away, right? And so although from the outside looking in, it looked like we had things figured out and we were successful and that was really fun, on the inside, we started to come, internally, we were starting to come to the realization that, like, no, this is not really a going concern business yet. This is just like, we have a product we have a solution that certain customers find value in, and there's something unique about what we're doing, but we can't actually, with any predictability or any certainty, go find another customer. And so, like, that was kind of like a bummer thing to consider. We could have just kept hanging on and milking that, like, for what it was, but it was only a matter of time before you lose a customer. You're always going to lose customers in business. So if you're not planning for, like, customer churn and replenishing that, you're going to have a bad time. That was just logical to us. Like, despite what seemed like success, the business wasn't future-proof. We could have left it as is, but I would not be standing here today. We had to change the business. We could not predictably and repeatably acquire a customer. If you can't predictably and repeatably acquire a customer, you're not going to be able to, like, scale. You're not going to be able to build systems, and you're not going to be able to, like, you're going to hit a ceiling in terms of how big your business can get pretty quick. And again, like, that wasn't fun, that wasn't great, but, like, it was just logical. It was common sense to us that we had to keep tinkering. We did not have a model yet. Oops, sorry, I went the wrong way. So I'm in the 2017, 2018 era, was prone to reading some TechCrunch and reading, like, what was Silicon Valley doing, and, like, everybody's building software. And I got caught up in the hype of, like, if you're not building software, like, you're not even building a cool company. Like don't even, services are so lame, they don't scale, they're not profitable. And people were telling us that, and I'm like, oh yeah, okay, cool. Well, we need to solve this, like, differentiation problem. We need to be able to, like, better articulate, like, what it is that's different about us. So, like, let's solve that with software. And we went all in on software for, 3 to 4 years, because we thought, like, that would help us stand out, and that would help us, like, take the things that we were doing with people, and if people liked that work, we could just give them the methodology, the best practices, and then our own custom-built tools to help them do the work, and they can go do it themselves. And we'd still be available, like, the services team would be available on the side if they needed, like, extra bandwidth or extra support, and we would be there to help them do that. We got some initial traction with that. We were able to start a few more conversations, get a little bit bigger, keep growing, and we maintained that trajectory of growth for a while until, in 2019, we were the 29th fastest growing startup on the Inc. 5000 list, which was a pretty big deal at the time. Yet again, we thought we were awesome, and we had it all figured out. And we were high-fiving, and it was a good time. But that fun too ended. Again, I have an accounting degree, and I started a company that started building software and had no appreciation for the importance of tech debt and like architecting software for scale and all of these things that can go wrong. I had no appreciation for just how south that can go so fast. And so even though, again, from the outside looking in, we kept growing, we looked like we had it figured out, the software that we had built turned into just a rat's nest of features on top of features on code that we had started building in 2016 as internal tools to like start simplifying our own workflows. And it was just mayhem. And so every time we would add a new customer, something would break. Every time we added a new customer, like the reports, like the data organization and the data roll-up stuff like would be inaccurate. Like literally like 1 + 1 would equal 3. And like fundamentally, like the core things that people were relying on us to do was just not accurate. And we had a great engineering team, but they were spending so much time just like holding that software together with duct tape and baling wire that they couldn't like actually like make progress on doing anything new. And just as importantly, like this, there was no sort of like overarching like strategic like cohesion between software and services at the time. We wanted there to be this like exponential value creation in software plus services, like a 1 + 1 = 3. But like the software didn't work, and we were making all of the services like sell their services through the software, and the messaging was convoluted, and it ended up just being like the definition of capital destruction. It was like a 1 + 1 = 1.5, right? And so, after we kept growing in 2019, we raised a venture round. And we went the venture route. Again, we thought that was cool. I thought that was cool. And but by 2021, we had to go to them and say, we have no investable thesis. The software doesn't work. We have to completely stop. Like the software needs to be rebuilt entirely. And we pretty much have to go back to square one in terms of like, if the software can't help us acquire customers, then we don't know what will. And we have to go back all the way back to like, what is the core value prop that we're providing in the world, and like admit that we like had to go back to exactly square one. And that was really hard. When we recognized that we had big problems with the software, at the time we were like, well, let's just separate out. We recognized that we had two separate businesses, essentially. Who we were selling software to was not the same customer that we were selling services to. And so we essentially had two different companies. And so we didn't know what to do other than like, one thing was we knew that we needed to split them apart. We didn't know what the future of either of them would be separate, but we knew it wasn't working together. So we just admitted that these are two different companies, and we spun it out. And that's why Pathlabs is Pathlabs today. Pathlabs was spun out as the services business of LumenAd. And LumenAd, the software, we were going to rebuild LumenAd, the software, but no longer subject our services team to all the mayhem and the chaos of the software. They could just go do their own thing. What that would be or how long that would last, because we didn't know how we would acquire a customer with services. We didn't know then. So we split off Pathlabs, and we just not a couple quarters later came to the conclusion too that, okay, fine, we have to rebuild the software from the ground up. If we're going to do that, like let's recognize that that will take millions and millions of dollars. That will take a long time. Is there really even an ROI there? We had to ask ourselves that fundamental question of would we actually even just go build the same thing again? The landscape had changed so much that what we were building to solve our own problems for were now tools that other tools that existed to solve those problems. So we're actually shoot, we have no idea what we would even build. So we shut the software down. In the depths of the pandemic, and we laid off half the team, which was by far the hardest decision I have had to make in those 10 years. Was admitting defeat, and like I had put so much of my own credibility into the software. We'd hired so many people. We'd hired so many great people because we sold them that like, we knew what we were doing. Like, this is going to work. We're ready to cruise. We're ready for prime time. And it didn't work. So here's the recap in 2 years. In 2019, we were the 29th fastest growing startup. We raised an awesome seed round. Just a couple years later, we thought we were pretty much going to shut the whole business down. High highs, low lows. Fundamentals, number 3, humility. There was no point in me sticking my head in the sand and trying to pretend that problem didn't exist. And to acknowledge that there was a problem was to admit that like that was on me. And every, 40 people that we laid off, that's on me. But the only way forward was to either the whole company goes or half the company goes. And you kind of have to you have to run towards those problems. You can't run away from them. You can't stick your head in the sand. But it takes a lot of humility to admit admit mistakes that have like that many downstream consequences. It's brutal. Okay. We're back to a tiny team. There's no software. We just have this services business. That was the first time in a really long time that we allowed ourselves the freedom to like really think about like what was the unique thing that our services were doing and what value were we providing. Because again, our customer retention stayed high through that entire thing. When we acquired a customer, they stuck around. And when we iterated on that like messaging long enough, we came to this conclusion that was this like, again, it felt so contrarian at the time. It felt so like what an absurd thing to say, but we were kind of like anti-software. We were anti-tools and anti-technology. And we went all in on this messaging, like in a world drowning in tools, like marketers are desperate for solutions. And because we realized that like our customers couldn't have cared less about how we solved the problem. They just wanted the problem solved. And again, like I was so like the tools are so cool. I thought the technology was so fun and so rad, and but nobody else cared. They just want a problem solved. And like that, we helped them kind of like think differently about the problem that they had. To them, these marketers solved this like this media execution problem either by like hiring an entire team to do it in-house, which is a massive investment, fixed costs, and it doesn't scale. If they lost one of their accounts, they would have to fire half their team and whatever, right? So like in-housing those capabilities were brutal, and marketers typically don't have the skill sets to hire like the types of like skill sets, like the type of employees that can do that job. They're not marketers. It's totally different. So in-house was one option, or you use vendors. And vendors aren't strategic. They're just you say jump, I'll say how high. And there's no strategy and there's no customization to that. And so what Pathlabs realized, the unique thing that we were doing was we were actually taking the best of both worlds of the strategy and the customization of in-house with the scalable, flexible costs of outsourcing it. And we called that and we created a category around it. And that allowed us to talk about how we were different, not better. You want to be different, not better. And I think that, and it was from that like big unlock that we finally figured out like how to grow, like how to predictably and repeatably acquire a new customer. We went from, 35 employees in 2021 in the media services business to, I think right now, at least when we sold it, it had 110, 115. I think they finished the year with $70 to $75 million in revenue. Services. Again, it seems so boring. And it's almost too simple to make, it seems too simple. And it took us a while to come to terms with that. But, fundamental trait number 4 is resilience. We're not geniuses. There's probably some geniuses at Pathlabs. I'm not one of them. All we did is buy ourselves enough time to make enough mistakes and to keep experimenting, to keep iterating. We bought enough time to just figure out the model. We just failed enough. Failure isn't the opposite of success. It's part of the process. I really believe that. We just failed forward. If I have 2 seconds to explain to somebody how we did it, that's literally what I say. We failed forward. It sounds like a motivational poster on a wall, which fail forward. Again, it just seems so simple. It just seems so unremarkable, but achieving that exceptional outcome had nothing to do with ourselves being exceptional. Like, sometimes it gets overcomplicated, and because when people like to go on LinkedIn and talk about some new cool tactic or some new cool capability, or how they sound smarter by making it sound harder, right? And that gets clicks, that drives engagement, and that's all really awesome. But that's not really accurate. Of course, at times, there's incredibly smart people doing incredibly smart things. All of that is true. I don't mean to diminish that, but you can't do it at the expense of the fundamentals. The fundamentals have to be there, and then you can build on top of that. For 10 years, for 7 years, we were sacrificing the fundamentals and trying to do cool stuff. And it got us nowhere. So for me, if I have to distill it down, again, this is like a community lecture. So it's there's tons of things I'd love to talk about: go-to-market strategies and value propositions, and message market fit, product market fit, all of those things. But if I have to distill it down into just the core takeaway for me when I really think about it, it's these fundamental traits, and I really believe that. I don't mean to sound like I'm oversimplifying it. It is simple. It just takes a long time. It's not a get rich quick scheme. It's a get rich slow scheme, I guess. But you follow that. Those traits mean that to be an entrepreneur and to achieve some sort of exceptional outcome, it does not have to be 9 figures. It doesn't have to be anything like that. It can just be your own definition of success. You don't have to be exceptional. You just have to follow these ordinary traits that are accessible to everybody. Yeah, thanks. Justin's going to come up? Yeah, sure. Let's do that. Yeah, you want to ask some questions?
Is this hot? Look at that.
Look at that.
Ryan, thank you. Some great insights there. I'd love to press on a couple of those if you're willing.
Yeah.
So you closed by mentioning the importance of the fundamentals. And oftentimes the path straightens behind us. But at what point in that 10-year arc did it occur to you that the fundamentals were the most important thing?
When we started iterating on that Pathlabs messaging, and we came to the conclusion of anti-tools, anti-software, it was so contrarian. And it made zero sense to most people. And it was there's no way it can be this simple. But we started testing it, and it was working for us. That was when I was oh yeah. That was my first oh, it can be this simple. So validating that Pathlabs messaging.
And at that point, had you already given the venture capital back?
Yes, we had. In 2021, I had to go back to them and say, I literally don't know what we're doing. We were fortunate enough to have a services business that generated cash to pay back investors, which not many people are in the position of doing. So that was very fortunate for us. So they made a couple bucks, but that by no means was a success for them. So yes, I paid them back in 2021, and then prior to the Pathlabs acquisition being announced, I had to call them and be like, hey guys, just so you know, I really had no idea what we were doing, because then we just sold it and they would have loved to have had those shares. But yeah, they did not get to participate in that.
So I'll push a little bit on the contention that you're an ordinary guy who had an extraordinary outcome. It seems like it takes an extraordinary sort of person to be able to admit defeat, and you come across as exceptionally authentic and in touch with facing that hard reality. Talk about that moment. What was the most difficult moment, and how did you get through it?
Yeah, good question. Yeah. To me, it was like, in entrepreneurship, in small business ownership, in any sort of like type of like leadership position or small business, whatever, oftentimes like you're stuck facing, like you have to make a decision about something and there's no right answer. You have maybe like 4 paths. They're all terrible. Whichever path you choose, people are going to hate. And it's like there is no path of least resistance. So it's like of the terrible ones in front of me, which one am I going to choose? And so like I just kind of gotten used to that thinking. And for me at the time, again, it came down to just like logical thinking. Like it was either we let half the company go, or we have to shut the whole thing down because it doesn't work. And so like that didn't make the conversations with those 40 employees any easier. That was brutal. Over the years, we'd gotten better at figuring out how to, like, if you have to do layoffs, do it super early so that there's enough like severance and you can humanize it as much as possible. And so there's right ways and wrong ways to do layoffs. And I think that unfortunately, we've gotten pretty good at some of those. But just logically, I had to get comfortable with the fact that like, there's no good answer here. So you just better pick the least crappy one.
And that seems like important part of your leadership journey. Talk about that. I mean, you've talked about a lot of aspects of yourself, but talk about yourself as a leader and how the team grew and how you managed those changes as a leader of many people in the community.
Yeah, sure. I've grown a lot in my ability to build a team and to know that I've hired amazing people at LumenAd, but I hired them before we were ready for their skill sets, first of all. I've learned a lot in like, there's a time and a place for different skill sets and different experiences, and like you have to make sure you're like layering on the right experience and the right skill set for where you're at in a business. I've hired some amazing people and convinced them that we are like just right there at the precipice of skyrocket exponential growth, and only for us to like not be even close to that, but I thought we were. And and so they had a great career before, but they were not used to the uncertainty and the unknowns of a startup. But so I've gotten better at like building the right team for the moment. But in general, my philosophy is pretty simple on this, which is like never be the smartest person in the room. You don't ever want to be the smartest person in the room. And I've tried really hard to just understand that like where like my strengths and my weaknesses, and hire people like much smarter than me to surround myself with. And that like, again, despite all the highs and lows, the leadership team, well, even honestly, like the whole company, but like in particular the leadership team, like stayed relatively like constant, and made for like by far the most fun part of the journey, even in some of like the darkest moments. And so just like, those are the people that I would hang out with and we would do stuff with. But just hire people smarter than me is the short answer.
And any particularly influential and important mentors along the way? Maybe some folks in this room.
Yeah. So there's talk about like I wasn't lucky, but I was fortunate, right? I was able to, a lot of what we did was like we brute forced our way to success, which, I learned from my parents. They're right here. Hi, Mom. Hi, Dad. My parents are entrepreneurs and they're small business owners, and they pivoted from, for generations, my family owned like the boutique shoe store in downtown in South Dakota. And, one day the big box stores started like just killing that business model. And so they had to pivot away from like boutique shoe stores to something else, and talk about like starting something that you knew nothing about. They decided to get into the world of restaurants, which is arguably even more cavalier and reckless than me starting an advertising business. They were not restaurateurs, but they absolutely brute forced their way to success. And I think I was a pretty crappy employee. I grew up washing dishes sometimes when it suited me. when I wanted to like buy a new video game, I would convince my parents that I should wash dishes for just this hour, and they should give me $50. I feel like that works sometimes, but anyway, yeah. I grew up in a place that just like hard work, consistency, showing up. Like I got exposed to that, from an early age, and so that was a big part of it.
So you've used the phrase brute force on a couple of occasions.
Yeah.
That is a hard thing to maintain, and I'm sure there were moments where you wanted to quit. How did you sort of not listen to those voices telling you it was time to quit?
Thanks for letting me clarify this, because like I don't want to confuse brute force with just this like rise and grind 20 hours, 24 hours a day, like 365 days a year. Like I do believe if you want to do one thing well and one thing only well and let everything else sacrifice, that like that's not terribly impossible to do. Like most people can do one thing, like optimize for just one thing and commit everything to it and do it. And so it was really important to me, like despite some of those like brutal times, like yes, there's been periods where my wife was sick of hearing me like talk on the phone and whatever, but like I didn't necessarily go through this phase of just like brute force was not 24/7, 365, that type of thing. It was like we recognized that this was going to be a marathon, not a sprint. And so it was known, like there was definitely spikes. Like sometimes it would get stressful and you have to make sacrifices in the very short term. But like by no means was that just like, I just like committed everything to seeing that through. It was still very important. Like I think I maintained like fairly normal work hours.
Do we need to fact check that?
Most of the time. Yeah, you're putting me on the spot here, Justin.
That's when we get the good stuff. A lot of students in the room, and you interface with a lot of students today. You sort of cracked some misconceptions earlier in your remarks today about, the sort of idolatry of innovators and so forth. But for students in the audience, what sort of other misconceptions do you think you'd like to break on your way out tonight?
Ooh.
Or maybe misconceptions that aren't particularly useful for them.
Or that aren't particularly useful. Gosh, I'm trying to think. I talked at students all day today. I'm sure they're like, I left it all out there. I don't, like contrarian points of view. I think that like one thing that we talked about today was this, some students are a little bit nervous about this like coming AI revolution, and there's some like existential dread about that. I strongly believe that the future is bright for people who wanted to lean into like the unlock that AI is going to create. Again, this gets into some of this like Ledger stuff that we're doing now, but my whole point of view that we validated at Pathlabs, and it like is driving a lot of the strategy for Ledger, is this idea that like the world is drowning in technology and software, and the world is full of software just that has been purchased and it's sitting on shelves, and it's not like the capabilities aren't fully realized because people don't recognize that the tool is just one of the ingredients. There's so many other things that need to go into those ingredients. Like I use the analogy today that like software is like a tool like a saw or a drill or a hammer. So when people say that they're going to build a house, they don't go buy the tools thinking that they can build a house, right? They need an expert to use those tools to figure it out. AI is going to dramatically decrease the cost of like developing software. So we're about to 1,000x the amount of software and tools and like cool stuff that's going to come out, and people are going to get inundated by that, and they're going to lose interest in all of that. So what's the point of that is that the humans in that loop, the humans in that process to like connect the technology to actually like delivering solutions is going to be more important than ever. And I think it's a really good opportunity for students right now. And I think that yes, of course, there's a lot of unknowns and there's a lot of uncertainties with AI, but if you lean into it, I believe that there's way more reason to be excited about that than existential dread.
Super. Ryan, are you willing to take a couple audience questions? I think we have time for that, if there's any.
Yeah, go ahead.
Right here?
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
Could you tell us a little bit about LedgerAI, like the industry, what are you selling, and to who?
That's a really good question. So LedgerAI, what we say is like we're building the back office of the future for small and medium-sized businesses. Again, growing up in a world of observing, like I'm very familiar with small business, and then I went to LumenAd that grew pretty quickly, and the difference between how a back office is managed and what a small business has to deal with versus like what you're able to do when you have like resources and scale to invest in surrounding yourself with badasses to solve the back office problems. Whether you have two employees or 200, some of the same problems exist. And so, I bought this ledger.ai domain like a long time ago because I wanted to solve that problem, but I didn't necessarily have any key insight into like how I would do it differently than the endless like tools that exist for small business owners today to simplify the back office and like plenty of the services. But neither one of those things are like totally perfect for like truly solving this problem for small business owners. They want services, they want solutions, they don't want tools. Small business owners are too busy to risk like trying to like operationalize some new tool without absolute confidence that it's going to work. But they like this price of software, right? Services that are custom, there's a human will answer the phone and there's some guarantee that they can solve their problem. It's just really expensive. And so AI is going to flip this like SaaS model. SaaS is software as a service. It's historically been known. I think that AI is going to give it an opportunity to flip it called services as software. So it's like all the benefits of services, but priced like software. And so like we want to what we're doing at LedgerAI, we're not actually going to go into market as LedgerAI. We're buying these back office service providers like bookkeeping companies, payroll companies, IT companies. And then we're going to stitch them all together in a holistic solution and like make all of the team members that are currently there superhuman, so that instead of working with just 10 customers, they can work with 100. But we can cut the price to do that in by 90%, right? Like that's the thesis. And if history's any judge, it'll change 37 times between now and anything meaningful. So who knows? I'm better at managing expectations now. Yeah. Yeah. Yes, sir. In the black hat there.
Yeah, I have a question for you. In March of 2020, when the software was...
You guys, this is Max. Max is an early employee at LumenAd Pathlabs. He's one of the OGers. Thanks for coming, Max.
Yeah. In March of 2020, when the software was, let's say, going downhill.
It's a good way to put it.
The services business was kind of paused on a dime based on an event that you had none of us had any control over. I'm curious what the discussions or feelings were in March of 2020 when you were faced with both of those challenges.
Yeah. Let me think about that. That was, so like, I think we shut our offices down, Max, and like literally right around St. Patrick's Day. I feel like it was like March 15th, 2020. And so like, I can actually transport myself like back to like a very specific, like March 2020 is, I'm sure for many people, like you can go back to that date pretty easily. I thought the world was going to end. Like I didn't honestly, like nobody knew how dangerous it was or like the rates it was going to spread. I honestly didn't know. And I don't think that in that moment, this is probably not a very interesting answer because actually like I probably wasn't thinking about software and services. I was thinking about like, wait, so where are we going to work? What's about to happen? Like we have to shut this office down. I remember being so mad that like we have to shut the office down. So anyways, I don't know if that's like what you're getting at, but like it got pretty dark. But it was so much more existential than like software and services at the time. We didn't, things bounced back fairly quickly, I remember. And so at least like it was clear that the world wasn't going to come to an end. But because putting the slide deck together, I couldn't actually remember like the dates of when we made the decision to spin Pathlabs out or not. So don't put me on that spot because I can't like order like specific dates. I feel like it was like end of 2020, early 2021. I can't remember, but yeah. Thanks for coming, Max. Yeah. Yeah. His question was like, how did I see that as an opportunity and how do you get better at recognizing opportunities? Is that a fair way to summarize it? So a lot of entrepreneurs ask me like, how do I find an idea or like how do I even, I have nothing to start. Like I have no thesis or point of view or whatever. I was exposed to this world of like technology first advertising in a job that I was doing. It was like I had a GIS job at the time. And if you don't know what GIS is, it's like mapping data that has a location component and putting it on a map. And I was like the office manager person. And I was like the one person there with a business degree. The point is, I just had a job in a kind of an interesting field where interesting things were happening. They started talking about like different ways to use location data. And at the time, like the Twitter API was like wide open, and like it was like sending through, this stuff doesn't exist anymore because there's a privacy first world now. But back in the day, like all of the tweets had location data, like lat long coordinates on it, which meant you could like see what people were tweeting, where they were at. And then like the idea that we started talking about was like, well, we could like send super specific like ads to them based on like how they're feeling and where they're at and whatever. And it ended up going absolutely nowhere, but I was like the one person with a business degree, and they were like, here, you figure out if this is an opportunity. And that absolutely was not. But I had to go do research on the space. And so that's a long answer to like what is kind of can be a short answer, which is like, I think you just kind of have to like opportunities won't come to you. You just kind of have to like go get out there, start messing around with stuff. Like in getting a job and like finding an industry, like every industry, any job you have, like there's tons of room for improvement. And like you just kind of have to get to know a space well enough to like have some point of view that like there's an opportunity there. Like that's kind of a generic answer, but like you just have to do stuff. Yeah, go ahead.
So back in the day when it was just you and $10,000, you're just starting out. My question is, help is like really important. It's hard to do everything by yourself. How do you get people to co-sign on like your crazy new idea for business?
Yeah. First of all, just to correct the record, like LumenAd back in the day did have a co-founder, and starting a business with a co-founder is fraught with landmines and is way beyond the scope of this topic. Lots of ways to do it right, lots of ways to do it wrong. So just anyways, like technically there was 2 people on day one, but we had very different roles, and he didn't even live in Missoula or whatever. So, but again, like what I would come back to, actually, this I talked a lot. I threw this in here in case it came up. This is really dense, and please don't feel like you have to understand this. But if you're an entrepreneur, you should take a picture of this slide, and I'm happy to go deeper on it with you at a later time. But I think that like to your question, too many times like the best way to get people to buy into your idea is to get traction, is to make progress. And like make progress before you go try to like get people to join your vision. Before we hired anybody, I found a customer. And then even then it's a funny story on how I even like started working with that first employee. But again, that's kind of a long story. So I think that like one of the biggest mistakes that we made at LumenAd in the early years was not really fully understanding that you can simplify. There's a methodology to how you should go about building a business. I firmly believe this, and I think it like holds true for like lots of different types of businesses. It's not true for like deep technology that requires like massive R&D investments, whatever. So like set that aside. But again, like when I talked about like you can de-risk things, I adamantly believe you should start a business. Not like if you can find a business that you're passionate about and that has a unique problem to solve, that's great. But I don't think you should necessarily just like think about like, what am I passionate about? I'm gonna go start a business. I think you should, try to find a problem within that passion and then go after that. But you have to validate that there's a problem, right? And I don't think don't do anything else. Don't move on to steps 2 or steps 3 until you validated number 1. Go talk to people and validate that they have that problem. Then number 2, don't do anything else but validate that you can actually deliver a product or a service or a solution to their problem in a way that actually that they would say yeah, that solves my problem, thanks. And then make sure that the unit economics work. And again, now this is starting to sound more technical, and I got into it with the entrepreneurship class and stuff that was rad, and MIS, I pulled it up on MIS too, but you have to make, it sounds super simple, but you can sell things, and every time you sell something, you could lose money. The unit economics have to work, right? So again, if unit economics if you don't really know what that means, just you have to make sure that you can make money selling what you're selling. Only once you've gotten past 1, 2, and 3, and this is where Pathlabs got hung up. should you start figuring out like, okay, like how do I package up what we're doing in a way that will resonate with my like target customers? Product market fit gets talked about a lot. Message market fit does not get talked about much. We knew we had 1, 2, and 3, but we couldn't figure out number 4. We didn't know that at the time. I didn't know that we were like hung up there. I couldn't articulate that. Because so what we started doing is before we could figure out like how we could like, that message market fit is how you can like, how you go talk to customers about their problem. We were trying to like scale our go-to-market. Like we were way down here doing like all sorts of crazy things, like creating a bunch of like scale, hiring a bunch of people, like trying to automate a bunch of stuff, like doing cool, fancy things with CRMs. Like you don't automate anything until at least 5. And so in other words, like you can get really, like this simplifies it a lot. And I know it sounds like it's kind of heady, but if you really like just sit with it, I promise you, if you get to number 3, I'll spend as much time with you as you want on like 4, 5, and 6. I get a little bit more technical. But don't email me until you've at least talked to customers, potential customers.
I think that's about time. Ryan, thank you for being here, for sharing your insights, for being so generous with your energy, time, and wisdom. Thank you to the Gilkey family for supporting this venture. Suzanne, the College of Business, thank you. Thank you to UM and all the folks that came out tonight. There is a reception in the, whatever the room out there is called, with all the Grizz stuff. So transition out there. Ryan's going to float around. He's talked a lot today. I'm sure you can twist his arm into talking some more. But thank you very much.
Justin. Yeah, thanks, guys.
Yeah, that was awesome. Good job. Yeah. Awesome. How'd you feel?